They didn't just think I was a failure. That night, my family made sure everyone at the dinner table knew it. I sat quietly, napkin crumpled in my fist, while my father laughed about my wasted potential. My brother Vincent smirked, and my stepmother Sabrina nodded like it was fact. I didn't interrupt. I didn't defend myself. Then my father stood up, his chair scraping against the floor, and said the words that would haunt him forever. "Get out, Leo. You're useless." The room went still. Even Sabrina froze. Before I tell you what happened next, share if your family ever gave up on you, because that moment in the rain changed everything. That night, as I walked into the storm, water soaking through my jacket, I whispered to myself, "You'll regret this." My name is Leo Navarro, and in my family, names only mattered if they came with titles people could brag about. Doctor, lawyer, engineer, anything that sounded solid, respectable, and successful. My name never did. It floated around the table like background noise, acknowledged only when someone needed a cautionary tale. The dinner that night was held in our family home, the kind with framed diplomas lining the hallway and achievement awards displayed on every shelf. My father loved spaces like this. He believed the credentials you showed said more about you than anything you could explain. I was seated at the far end of the table, close enough to hear every quiet insult, far enough to be left out of the center. Vincent looked confident, polished, already practicing the role of golden child. People leaned toward him when he spoke, nodded at everything he said. My parents watched him with the same expression they'd worn my entire life when they talked about him. Relief mixed with pride. No one asked me how things were going. Not really. When someone did glance my way, Sabrina filled the space before I could answer. "Leo still try to figure things out," she said smoothly, like she was explaining a delay everyone understood. My father added something about patience, about how not everyone was built for academic pressure. They smiled as if they were being generous. I focused on the table instead, the way the candlelight flickered, the faint smell of roasted chicken and rosemary, the low hum of the television in the next room. These details grounded me. I'd learned a long time ago that if I stayed still enough, people would talk as if I wasn't there. Vincent's girlfriend sat across from me. She didn't dominate the table. She observed it. When my parents spoke, she listened without interrupting. When Vincent talked about his college plans, she asked questions that made him slow down. Her eyes moved carefully, taking in tone more than words. At one point, my father joked about how I'd struggled in school while Vincent excelled. The table laughed politely. I felt that familiar tightening in my chest, the one that came from being turned into a story someone else controlled. I didn't correct him. I didn't defend myself. Silence had become my reflex, not because I was weak, but because I was tired of explaining a life no one wanted to understand. What no one at that table knew was that this wasn't just another family dinner for me. It was a test of how long I could sit in a room built to make me feel small, and what would happen if someone finally noticed the cracks. My name had always come last in conversations about success. Not announced, not celebrated, just appended like a footnote no one expected to read. That night at dinner wasn't new. It was simply louder. As Vincent talked about his future plans, my parents leaned in, nodding at every sentence. My father added commentary, embellishing details, turning ordinary achievements into legendary stories. Sabrina smiled the way she always did when she believed she was presenting a perfect family to the world. Every so often, one of them glanced in my direction just long enough to remind me I was still part of the picture. Barely. Their words carried me backward. A few weeks earlier, I'd seen photos online from a celebration I hadn't been invited to, a party for Vincent's scholarship. Relatives I hadn't seen in years gathered in our backyard. When I asked about it later, Sabrina had sounded surprised that I'd noticed. She said it was mostly extended family, and she didn't want me to feel out of place, as if being excluded was protection. Then there was Vincent's graduation party, the music, the congratulations, people shaking his hand. I'd stood near the kitchen when my father's voice carried across the yard. He was talking about Vincent's future, about legacy, about success. Then he laughed and mentioned me, not with pride, with pity. People had nodded sympathetically. Someone had squeezed my shoulder like I was recovering from an illness everyone knew about. Back at the dinner table, Vincent lifted his glass and made a comment about how different paths lead to different destinations. He said it casually, like an observation, but his eyes flicked toward me. A reminder, a line drawn. I felt the familiar pressure behind my ribs, the urge to speak, to correct the story, to say something sharp enough to make them stop. Instead, I took a slow breath and folded my hands tighter. I'd learned that reacting only gave them more control. Silence at least belonged to me. The worst part wasn't the jokes. It was the pity. Vincent had offered to help me find work at a fast food restaurant once, voice soft, concerned. He said he didn't want me to struggle unnecessarily. The implication was clear. I was the problem that needed managing. At the table, Sabrina leaned toward Vincent's girlfriend and spoke about my future like it was an ongoing tragedy. She talked about realistic expectations, about how some people just weren't built for traditional success. Her hand rested on my shoulder, light but possessive. That was the moment something shifted. I didn't look up right away. I focused on the sound of my heartbeat, steady and controlled. All those nights working alone, all the sketches I'd filled in notebooks no one knew existed, all the decisions I'd made without anyone's approval. They thought my quiet meant uncertainty. They thought my patience meant dependence. Across the table, Vincent's girlfriend was no longer smiling. She was watching, really watching. And for the first time that night, I had the unmistakable sense that the story they'd been telling about me was about to run out of room. I didn't flinch when Sabrina's hand stayed on my shoulder a second too long. I didn't look at Vincent when he nodded like the matter of my future had been neatly resolved. Outwardly, I stayed exactly the same, calm, still agreeable. Inside, something finally settled into place. The truth was my life had never been as uncertain as they believed. It just didn't look like theirs. While my parents hosted dinners and talked loudly about reputation and success, my days ran on a different clock. Early mornings blurred into nights. The garage behind Martinez's auto shop stayed quiet except for the sound of tools and the occasional spark from my workbench. I learned to measure progress in small victories, a prototype that worked, a design that held quiet nods from contractors who tested my inventions. There was no applause, no audience, just momentum. I never talked about it, not because I was ashamed, but because I couldn't. The work demanded silence. One wrong word to the wrong person could ruin months of preparation. So when my family offered help, money, advice, I smiled and declined. Letting them underestimate me was safer than correcting them. That night at dinner, as conversation flowed around me, I realized how deeply they'd mistaken restraint for weakness. They saw my lack of a college degree as proof I'd failed. They saw my quiet life as surrender. They didn't see the discipline it took to build something from nothing, while everyone around me expected me to give up. Vincent leaned back in his chair, satisfied. My father ordered another drink. Sabrina talked about future holidays, already planning who would sit where. They were comfortable, certain. I felt the shift before anything was said. Across the table, Vincent's girlfriend had stopped engaging with the family's stories. Her gaze returned to me again and again, thoughtful, focused. She wasn't listening to the words anymore. She was watching the pauses, the moments when I chose not to speak, the way I didn't rush to defend myself. I'd seen that look before, the moment when someone realized they'd made the wrong assumptions. For the first time all evening, I let myself breathe a little deeper. Not because I expected rescue, not because I needed validation, but because I understood something they didn't. Control doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it waits. The dinner continued, but the balance had already changed. My parents were still talking, still performing. Vincent was still confident, yet there was a growing tension beneath the surface, like a quiet wire pulled too tight. I stayed seated. I stayed silent, not because I had nowhere else to be, but because I knew exactly when it would matter to stand up. My father raised his glass, eager to maintain control of the room. To family, he said, smiling wide, and to Vincent's bright future. Everyone echoed him, except me. I lifted my glass a second later, just enough not to stand out. I'd learned how to survive moments like this by staying half a beat behind. Vincent launched into another story about his plans. Bigger goals, better opportunities, brighter prospects. He spoke with the confidence of someone who'd never been questioned. My parents filled in the gaps for him, interrupting each other, polishing every sentence until it gleamed. And Leo, my father added suddenly, waving his hand in my direction like he'd remembered a detail late. Well, he's always been more of a hands-on learner. The pause before those words was deliberate. Sabrina laughed softly. He likes doing things his own way. She said the way people talk about stubborn habits they hope will pass. We just want him to be realistic. You know how competitive the world is. I felt a familiar tightening in my chest, the reflex to shrink. I kept my eyes on the table, the grain of the wood, a faint scratch near my plate, anything solid. Across from me, Vincent's girlfriend didn't look away. She tilted her head slightly, studying me as if a thought had just clicked into place. Then she asked calmly, "Leo, what exactly are you working on right now?" The question landed differently than the others. It wasn't casual. It wasn't polite filler. It was direct. Before I could answer, Vincent chuckled. "Nothing serious," he said quickly. "Just tinkering with stuff in the garage. Hobby projects." My father nodded, relieved to take over. Lots of young people go through experimental phases. It's normal. I felt heat rise in my neck. Still, I said nothing. The girlfriend didn't smile. "What kind of projects?" she asked, eyes still on me. The table went quiet in a way that felt unfamiliar. My parents shifted. Vincent cleared his throat. "He doesn't really like talking about it," Sabrina said, touching my arm again. "He's private." That was when the girlfriend leaned in, slightly lowering her voice, not enough to be secret, but enough to change the tone. "Are you building tools?" she asked me. I looked up for the first time in minutes. "Yes," I said. One word, calm, steady. Her eyebrows lifted almost imperceptibly. "For construction work?" she continued. I nodded. Vincent laughed again, a little too loudly. "See? This is what I mean. Very vague." The girlfriend ignored him. Her attention sharpened. "Professional now. Have you filed for any patents?" I felt my pulse slow. "Yes." The silence thickened. She exhaled slowly, eyes never leaving mine. Then she murmured just loud enough for the table to hear, "Wait, you're—" She stopped herself mid-sentence. The effect was immediate. Conversation died. Glasses paused halfway to mouths. Even the television in the next room seemed to fade to silence. It felt like the entire house had taken one breath and forgotten how to release it. My father frowned. "What is it?" he asked, irritation creeping in. The girlfriend straightened in her chair. "Leo Navarro," she said carefully. "You're the one who designed the modular tool system that went viral last month, aren't you?" No one spoke. I met her gaze and gave a small nod. The sound Vincent made wasn't quite a laugh and wasn't quite a gasp. "Viral what?" he demanded. She didn't answer him. She reached into her bag instead and pulled out her phone, tapping the screen with practiced ease. When she turned it around, a video played. "My tool, my design, my garage." The caption read, "Garage inventor creates tool that's changing construction work." The view count sat at over 2 million. She slid the phone toward the center of the table. "This," she said evenly, "is one of the most talked about innovations in the industry right now. I work in product development, and my entire team has been trying to figure out who designed this." My father leaned forward, squinting. Sabrina's confident smile had vanished completely. "We've been trying to contact the creator for weeks," Vincent's girlfriend continued. "No social media presence, no company website, just this video and a waiting list of contractors who want to buy it." Vincent shook his head. "That's not. He's just been messing around in a garage." She looked at him then, and her voice wasn't sharp. It was worse. It was controlled. "Your brother isn't messing around. He's building something remarkable." The room stayed frozen. Sabrina's hand slipped off my shoulder like it had burned her. Her mouth opened, then closed. She tried again, but no words came out. My father straightened, color draining from his face. "Why didn't you tell us?" he asked, the edge in his voice dulled by confusion. I didn't answer right away. I picked up my water glass, took a small sip, and set it down carefully. "You never asked," I said. Vincent stood abruptly, chair scraping against the floor. "This is ridiculous," he snapped. "If this was true, we would have known." The girlfriend's eyes flicked back to her phone. "The whole point was that you didn't," she said. Something in Vincent's expression cracked. Not anger, fear. Around us, the house seemed to hold its breath. People were staring now, whispering. I felt oddly detached, calm in a way I hadn't expected. I didn't hide it to prove anything. I said, my voice steady. I hid it because I need approval. My father swallowed. Sabrina stared at the tablecloth. Fingers clenched tight. I stood, smoothing my napkin before placing it beside my plate. The movement felt ceremonial, final. "I should go," I said, glancing at Vincent's girlfriend. It was nice to meet someone who actually asked. She nodded once, respect clear in her expression. I didn't look at my family again. I didn't need to. As I walked out of the room, the silence followed me, not the familiar silence of dismissal. This one was heavy, uncomfortable, earned. Behind me, no one spoke. And for the first time in my life, that silence felt like justice. I didn't rush when I left the house. The night air felt cooler than it should have, brushing against my skin like a reset. I walked the block before stopping, letting the noise fade behind me. My phone buzzed once in my hand. I didn't look at it. For years, I'd imagined this moment ending with shouting or apologies. Instead, it ended with nothing. And somehow that was heavier. In the days that followed, the silence held. No family group messages. No carefully worded text pretending nothing had happened. When Sabrina finally called, her voice was unsteady. She asked questions that sounded more like attempts to regain footing than genuine curiosity. I answered politely, briefly. I didn't fill the gaps for her anymore. Vincent never reached out. I heard through someone else that the dinner became awkward in retellings. The story edited to protect pride. I let it be rewritten. I didn't need credit. I needed distance. What surprised me most was how light everything felt once I stopped carrying their expectations. My work continued. Orders, improvements, expansion. Nothing had changed there. What changed was a quiet inside me, the constant bracing, the urge to prove something to people who had already decided who I was. I realized then that resolution doesn't always look like reconciliation. Sometimes it looks like clarity, like knowing where you end and where other people's opinions begin. I didn't lose my family that night. I lost a version of myself that kept shrinking to fit into their story. And I didn't miss them at all. I used to think being accepted by my family would finally make me feel whole. Now I know that understanding myself mattered more than earning a seat at their table. That night didn't change who I was. It revealed it. If you've ever been underestimated by the people who are supposed to believe in you most, you're not alone. Share where you're listening from, and tell me what helped you stand your ground. And if stories like this matter to you, subscribe so you don't miss the next one.